Hey guys, welcome back. Just doing this as a quick intro because the video you're about to watch is from my winter 2024 arc. So quite a few months ago now when I was a little bit colder and a little bit fatter. So you see me there in my dressing gown. And I just never put that video out, and it's quite interesting because now David Lynch has unfortunately passed away, and it has sort of come full circle to being relevant again, which is quite topical to the actual video itself. It's something that happens when my videos become kind of meta relevant. So without further ado, I guess RIP David Lynch, and I suppose Jesus as well, technically. And all right, editor Quillen, roll the clip. Hey again, guys. Coming at you today from a time of day where there's just enough daylight that it's not going to look like a YouTube video from 2008 because of the lack of photons the webcam has to work with. Maybe it'll be more like one from 2012 or so. So this is going to be definitely one of the more important videos that I make, especially for creatives, people who consider themselves creative, or especially spiritual creatives, people who believe that they're kind of working with the ether on some level. And the message I want to convey today is an idea that I've had for a long time, and I've recently discovered it's an idea that David Lynch has and also Jesus has. So I think it's sort of, we're triangulating on something that's definitely very much worth thinking about. So there's a David Lynch video you'll have to watch. It's only 2.5 minutes long. There's not really much point watching this video if you don't watch that first. Hopefully I'll be able to link it in the description. It's called David Lynch on Where Great Ideas Come From. So go and watch that now. And welcome back. So the video, as you hopefully now know, is likening the creative process to fishing. And this is really interesting because this is something I've thought about before as well. And this sort of David Lynch idea might have come into my creative field of vision by osmosis somehow. So maybe I got the idea from him and didn't even realize it, but it's a very important idea because when people go fishing, we have this very strong association in our culture with the tranquility of that as an experience, and the idea that people who go fishing are not necessarily trying to catch a fish or trying to catch a specific fish or anything like that. It's more of a situation where they enjoy the process and they enjoy the journey. And catching fish is sort of an added bonus. And patience is extolled as a virtue in that kind of craft because with patience will inevitably come fish, and also the skill of becoming better at catching fish. But there's an acknowledgement that it takes time. And, I think this kind of tranquil, non-committal patience is antithetical to the vision of creativity that a lot of us, I think, find ourselves lumbered with, sometimes unknowingly, which is more of a feeling that, when you're kind of pursuing your creativity, you're putting your nose to some kind of grindstone. It's almost like the closer you get to actually doing it, the scarier it becomes, and the more pressure, and the more you start to have, fear of failure, fear of an inability to realize an idea, fear that you don't have any good ideas, right? All of these resistances come up, and anybody who has any of these issues that has been trying to pursue a creative pathway in life, especially a creative career, can attest to just how ruinous this can be, and how the tranquility of fishing seems like a dream, right? But I think it's a dream that we can all realize. So you've watched the David Lynch video. Now I want to read you a passage. This is from the book of Matthew. So we're at chapter 17, verse 24. So it's a little archaic, so I'll read it and then maybe hopefully give it a little bit of a translation. And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter, who was an apostle, and said, Doth not your master pay tribute? And he, that is Peter, saith, Yes. And when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, What thinkest thou, Simon? Simon is actually Peter. They're the same guy. Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? Peter saith unto him, Of strangers. Jesus said to him, Then are the children free. Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, and cast a hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. That take, and give unto them for me and thee. Now you can see when I saw the David Lynch thing, and then I saw this, I was like, you can see how excited I was. Like, wait a minute, this is weird, right? Now, ostensibly, that's basically it's like tribute paying, I guess, something like tax paying. Like basically, a tax collector comes and he's like, look, is Jesus going to pay his taxes or not? And his apostle Peter's like, yeah, of course he'll pay his taxes. And he goes back to Jesus, I guess, hoping that Jesus is going to pay his taxes. And he's like, are we going to pay this dude? And Jesus says, well, look, so that we don't offend them. There's an interesting thing about the children and all that. That's a verse for another day, the bit he says beforehand. But when he says, look, so we don't offend them, I want you to go fishing, and you're going to cast your hook into the sea, and the first fish you pull up is going to have gold. It's going to have coins in its mouth. And this is a very strange idea, but it's interesting to think in terms of what Jesus didn't say. So he didn't say, no, I'm not going to pay them taxes because I'm the Son of God and I can do whatever I want, right? That's almost never his attitude. And he also doesn't say, I'm just going to magically manifest a coin. And, like the thing where he pulls it from behind his ear and he goes, here's the coin, go give it to the tax man. He doesn't do either of those things. He says, go fishing. And the miracle that I'm going to work is that when you throw your hook into that big random sea, that what you pull up is going to be exactly what you need to get the man off your back, right? And I just love that. I think it's such a wonderful image. And Simon, Peter and Simon, same guy, is a fisherman, right? So Jesus finds him as a fisherman and he says, come with me and I'll make you a fisher of men, So this is sort of like background that Jesus is saying, like, go do what you do best, and I'll make sure that you're taken care of. And so let's look at David Lynch's, let's look at the points that David Lynch makes about fishing in the videos, just so we can recap, because you've hopefully watched the David Lynch video. If you haven't yet, for real, go watch it. And then we've talked about the Jesus fishing thing. So we'll get back to how it relates to ideas and creativity. But I hope you can see already where it is, right? How it does. So the first thing David Lynch says that I think is noteworthy is he says that ideas are like fish in that you don't make the fish, you just catch them, right? And again, I think this is a really important way of keeping our ego as artists, or whatever we do. We have to keep our, in some capacity, sorry, my book hit the space bar. Okay, so because of that, you don't have to be offended when you don't have good ideas, or when the ideas you have aren't that good, right? Just like sometimes you catch like a fish that you can't eat, and you know, sometimes you just catch nothing. That's not a problem if you enjoy fishing and you don't take every moment that you're not catching something as like a personal insult, because again, it's not you who's deciding whether you get the fish or not, right? So that's the first point he makes, which I think is really important. Another interesting thing he says is, if you think a place can conjure an idea, like if you think you're going to be inspired if you go somewhere, then you have to go there. And you know, it's almost like he doesn't quite go out and say this, but it's almost like this is part of the idea, right? This is part of the inspiration. Like if you're like, man, I just really have to go to Paris to write a book or something. Yeah, I know that sounds all very like romantic and cliched, but if you get possessed by that, the spirit of that idea, the going to the place is part of that idea. And in ancient Greece, for example, it was very common. There was a practice that you can look it up. It's called incubation. So in the archaic sense of the word, what they meant when they said incubation is that people would go to a sacred ritual place, like a sacred site, and they would fall asleep there in the pursuit of having a prophetic or divine dream. So, and you can imagine from a psychological perspective that really would do something, right? It would be very unlikely if you believed that somewhere was a very special place and you were reaching out to the sacred, to the spiritual, to insight, and you were saying, I'm going to fall asleep in this place, travel there and fall asleep there, almost like a tribute. Something's going to happen, right? It's unlikely that you would wake up with nothing, with no dream. And interestingly, in my opinion, even if you didn't have a dream, your mind would spend a lot of the sort of, you know, mystical stuff that it does, or unknowable stuff that it does while we sleep. It would spend a lot of that time trying to get you over the line to the point where you had an insight when you woke up, right? So, and fishing is that. Fishing, you go to a place, and again, a lot of people who fish are not going there for the fish, they're going there for the peace and quiet. But they are nevertheless going somewhere as a ritual to bring about a state of mind that is desirable to them. So David Lynch notices this. And again, Jesus in this parable, or you could call it a miracle, but it's obviously an allegory. He kind of points this out in the ritual. It's like, okay, I'm going to send you away to get this thing, right? I'm not just going to give it to you. You have to do something. There's a labor involved on your part as an act of faith, right? It wouldn't be valuable. It wouldn't hold the same value if you were just given it for free. You are a participant as much as God or the cosmos is, right? And that brings me on to his next point. He says, he imagines it's like, this is when he's talking about the ideas he gets given for his films, that it's like there's a man in another room who's just giving him piece by piece. And this also is, I think, an excellent way to think about it. And again, who's the man in the other room giving it? Well, that depends. I think even if you do believe in God, it's not necessarily always God giving it you, right? But I think if you're a creative, it's a good problem to have. Where if you're getting enough ideas that you can kind of take or leave them and be discerning and go, I think this one's probably not for the greater good, and this one probably is. Like, if you're having no ideas, you have to establish some kind of creative practice where you can at least get ideas reliably from somewhere. And I think that this idea of this like progressive revelation, this kind of is how it works. And again, David Lynch doesn't make this analogy, but it's kind of like when you're fishing and you feel a little bite, right, a little tug. The process of reeling in the fish and actually catching the fish is just as much a part of manifesting that fish as is, going out and throwing your hook out. And it's equally not, at least not entirely, your responsibility whether it pans out or not. So it's okay if you get an idea and you can't quite bring it to fruition, but you can reel it in as well as you can, and then just recognize when it's not panning out and it's not going to pan out. And again, there's a skill level to that there's a way that there are ways that you can tell, and sometimes it's not always apparent. Like, when you're fishing, sometimes the hook starts dragging along the lake or the ocean floor. And if it's snagged on seaweed or something, you might think you're reeling something in and you're not. And that's because you're not an experienced fisherman at that point. An experienced fisherman would be like, oh yeah, there's nothing here anymore, right? And again, they're not going to be like, oh, I'm a failure of a fisherman and like I should just go home and like cry or whatever. They just go, all right, they reel it in, they finish reeling it in, they put more bait on the hook, or not if they're a fly fisherman, and they, start again. Okay, so the last thing I got written here, this is a really important one, and I think Jesus and David both actually put an emphasis on this in a subtle way. So it says, suffering cramps the flow of creativity. And he makes an analogy of Van Gogh, that if Van Gogh got diarrhea every time he went out painting, then he wouldn't have gone out painting. And I think it's interesting that he listed Van Gogh, because there is actually I think a very real tendency in our culture, which I'm sure you're aware of, to glorify the suffering of creatives, and it almost produces this impression that suffering is prerequisite to the creative impulse. And again, I think there's a grain of truth to that, but the reality is that a degree of suffering is inevitable, as the Buddha so rightly pointed out. So you don't have to seek it out. And what David Lynch is saying here is that if you condition yourself to suffer specifically when you're being creative, so it's not that you're having a hard life and then you're taking solace in your creativity. He's saying, what if Van Gogh, every time Van Gogh went out, he got diarrhea, right? Well, a lot of us do that, I think, and it's less like diarrhea and more like constipation, I think, is actually a more appropriate bowel analogy here, because it's the feeling of resistance. It's the feeling like maybe we're not good enough, et cetera, right? I've covered those bases. That is holding the whole thing up and is making the whole experience unpleasant, and making us just want to not go there, right? And again, this is the miracle of Jesus, is that, when the tax man comes to your door and says, I need this much from you, or the world comes to your door and says, I need this as tribute, like financially. Well, you're in one, like, you can't get that by fishing, right? Of course you can sell fish, but the analogy here is that he's catching a fish which is of no use to the man, so to speak. But inside the mouth of that fish, he will find a coin by the grace of God. And I think that is the kind of faith that you need to have if you're seeking artistry as a career path. Because, if you're a musician, or a poet or a writer or whatever, there's a great line by a singer-songwriter I have a lot of respect for called Pete Bernard. And he's singing this song about this guy, this songwriter who swore he was going to make all this money. And then it says 10 years later, he's just downtown in Nashville selling something that ain't for sale, right? So it's like, well, you're a musician. We all know musicians don't make money, right? But you still have to make money. So the cliche answer, the sort of like 50s dad answer is, well, yeah, you're never going to make a living being a musician. So like, just give up on that idea and go do something else. But this allegory of Christ is more like, well, it's not me, it's not God who's saying you need money. It's the world. I'm saying what you need to do is what you were born to do. What you should do is what I made you want to and need to and like to do. Truly, right? I'm not talking about chasing selfish pleasures. I'm talking about your vocation. So if you go and do your vocation, you might not see that there's any money in that. But when you look in the fish's mouth, it'll be there, right? And again, it's not to say you'll be a gazillionaire. It's not about like that you're going to have all the riches in the universe, but you'll have enough. And the act of fishing, if you're truly a fisherman, will satisfy you. So the money is for satisfying other people. So you get enough existential sustenance to live a life of joy and satisfy others and the financial requirements of living in the world, right? So I love that. I think it's a beautiful ideal. I think you can kind of see the moral of the stories as they're triangulating. Creativity is like fishing. It takes patience. It takes humility. It takes grit sometimes, but it's not supposed to drain you. It's not supposed to be something that you can only do for a little while. It's supposed to be something that you would rather be doing than most of the other things you do in your life. And something that you're grateful to be able to find the time to do, right? And, in that space, giving enough time to it, who knows what you'll catch, right? And, maybe you'll catch the big kahuna one day and they'll think that you're a genius or whatever, but you should know in your heart of hearts that it's that you just happen to catch a good fish. And that way, when they call you a genius, if you're fortunate enough for them to call you a genius, you'll know you're not a genius, so that when you undertake your next creative project, you're not thinking, oh man, they all think I'm a genius. How am I going to top this? You just go, well, I'm just a fisherman, so I'm going to go fishing again and see what happens. So I think that's all I have to say on that matter. I think I did a pretty good job of summarizing it. David Lynch, Jesus Christ. Lot to learn from both of them. So good luck with it. I hope that fishing pans out for you, regardless of whether you catch something or not. Just enjoy the process. All right, lots of love. Goodbye.